Derby County face a huge January transfer window in just about 6 weeks' time as they look to continue this huge run of form which they've found themselves on over the course of recent weeks. Now, as we head into the game versus Watford this weekend, we're going to take a look at the Derby County squad and what I think could be done over the course of January as Derby County look to improve. Now, obviously, this is hugely dependent on what injuries may occur over the next 6 weeks and what could potentially happen to players like Owen Beck, and even you look at someone of the ilk of Ben Brereton Diaz. But we are going to have to wait and see what does happen in January. But let's take a brief overview of the Derby County squad. Now, obviously, we can't talk about January without talking about the huge interest in Jakob Vidal-Zetterstrom. Now, for me, I can't see Zetterstrom moving on. Obviously, over on my main channel, you will have seen a video a few days ago about Derby County assessing a new bumper contract for him to ward off that Premier League interest. And in my opinion, that will probably get done over the course of the next few weeks. Also in that goalkeeper position, O'Donnell and Vickers are pretty safe. Now, in terms of the defensive standpoint, the only real players I could see leave from this sort of standpoint is Owen Beck, Ryan Nyambe and Curtis Nelson, but obviously that will depend on the injury situation. In terms of midfielders, I think you look at Ibu Adams and I think he could potentially head out the door if the right offer comes in. You look at the likes of Liam Thompson as well, who's not necessarily played as much football as he probably wanted this season, and obviously David Ozo's injury is something to talk about. Now, in the forward line, obviously Lennon Wilden's headed out on loan over the course of the last few weeks. He scored a brace just a few days ago. I think we could potentially see the end of Corey Blackett-Taylor over the course of the January transfer window, and I also think Caden Jackson could be one who could make a move out of the club. Now, you let me know your thoughts down in the comments, but we're going to go into each player and each position in a lot more detail. Now, let's get into it. If you have not done so already, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button and turn on that notification bell, and I'll catch you in the video. Now, obviously, the goalkeeper position for me is a really easy one to talk about. Derby County need to do everything in their power to keep hold of Jakob Vidal-Zetterstrom. Josh Vickers is an excellent number 2, and Richard O'Donnell, I think, speaks for himself. He's a brilliant third choice goalkeeper. He's not going to kick up a fuss about not playing, and he's ultimately not going to be a problem at Derby County. Now, for me, that is easy. That is job done, job said, job completed. The goalkeeper department doesn't need any work at this current moment. Now, as I mentioned just a few moments ago, there's a couple of players from this defensive department who I could see leave. Obviously, Owen Beck has had his injury trouble since joining Derby County. Picked up that injury in the warm-up up against Burton Albion. Has not featured for Derby County since. I think he played 40 minutes for the under-21s a couple of weeks ago and unfortunately picked up another injury. So for me, that will probably spell the end of his time at Derby County if it is sort of a lengthy injury. And I think that's what Derby County need to do in favour of their future, if I'm completely honest. Now, Ryan Nyambe is always going to be an interesting discussion. I think he's a very, very good one-on-one defender, but ultimately I don't think he fits into this Derby County squad at the current moment. I think he doesn't really fit into that right wing-back position for me, and I don't necessarily think he should play at right centre-half. Now, for me, do I think Nyambe can still have an impact at Derby County in a championship club? Absolutely, but I just think that it's sort of last case. I don't think he's necessarily sort of in anybody's minds as potentially a first name on the team sheet, but we will sort of have to wait and see sort of how that develops. Obviously, injuries are going to play a huge part in how Derby County assess the squad over the course of the next few weeks and what changes they make going into the January window. Now, finally on that list is Curtis Nelson. Now, Curtis Nelson, at 32 years of age, I think he's made a couple of appearances for the under-21s now, and obviously is on the return. And he's done a great job with his recovery, and that's why we're talking about him playing football now in November. Obviously, it's one of those for me where I'm not surprised that he's only just sort of really got back into it. Obviously, back training with the first team, and I think he's probably a great leader. But it's one of those for me where I just don't necessarily see where he fits at Derby County. Obviously, you look at the introduction of Sanderson, who I think his move will be turned permanent. You look at Langash, you look at Clark, you look at Bart, and you look at Fozziol, who can play across that back three. You've also got Nyambe in there as a younger option. And as much as I like Curtis Nelson, I appreciate what he did. I do think that he will probably move on. Whether that be in January or the summer, I'm not entirely sure. I think injuries will play a huge part of this. Because obviously, if Derby County suffer an injury to a Langas, to a Clark, to a Sanderson, you need someone else who can step up. And Curtis Nelson, for me, certainly can step up, but his future is definitely in doubt. Now, in terms of, let's talk about the wing-backs for starters. Callum Elder and Joe Ward, completely fine. I don't think we're going to see any changes in regards to that. I think both players have been excellent over the course of the last few weeks and have been a huge part of that winning run. Obviously, Joe Ward stepped in perfectly for Max Johnston, and in my opinion has put Max Johnston properly on the back burner at Derby County when Max Johnston does finally return in about 6 weeks' time. Now, the big conversation that I do think does need to happen is in regards to both David Ozo, Ibo Adams and Liam Thompson. I think Liam Thompson hasn't played as much football as he probably would have wanted. Obviously, he has had those injuries for Derby County to have to deal with as well, which ultimately sort of knocked him out of the running of even being in the team. But I think when you look at how well Bobby Clark's played in midfield, obviously David Ozo has been brilliant as well, and then the introduction of Lewis Travis, I think it sort of puts Liam Thompson really on the back burner at Derby County. So I think there could potentially be a loan move in the offing for Thompson during the January transfer window, but we will wait and see what happens on that one. Now, in terms of David Ozo, obviously, as of time of recording, we have no information on his injury situation, which means as I sit here right now, I'm probably anticipating it to be at least a 6-week injury, which takes him up until the start of January. Now, if it's any longer than that, I do believe Derby County may assess their options and may potentially send David Ozo back to Crystal Palace and go and pick up potentially a more reliable option. Now, for me, I love David Ozo. I think he's an incredible footballer, and if he could stay fit, I think he'd easily be playing in the Premier League, if I'm completely honest. But his fitness levels and his injuries have ultimately cost him over the course of the last 12 months, and I'm hoping that that isn't the same again. Now, I did want to talk a little bit about Ibo Adams. There has been some reported interest over the course of the last few weeks. You look at Sheffield United, Luton Town, both looking at Ibo Adams, and no doubt there'll probably be more clubs looking at him as well. And I do think that's a deal which could be struck with Derby County should the right offer come in, and should Derby County be able to find an adequate replacement, which in my personal opinion I don't think would be too difficult. Now, obviously, that will be a huge move for Derby if it does happen, but we will have to wait and see. Now, obviously, we go on to the forwards. Corey Blackett-Taylor and Ryan Brewster are in the midfield category for some reason, and in terms of Ryan Brewster, he hasn't really played, and I'm really hoping to see him play more over the course of the next 6 weeks. And in terms of Corey Blackett-Taylor, we're in a very similar boat. Hasn't necessarily played, but has showed his quality when he has. Now, for me, though, Corey Blackett-Taylor is in that situation where if he can't stay fit, we don't know what to do with him. And it's one of those for me where sometimes you have to cut your losses. And we only bought him for £300,000, which when you look at some of the money we've spent during the summer transfer window, it's not a great deal. So if we can recoup some of that money, maybe on a loan fee or potential sale, I think Derby County absolutely should look at that. Now, in terms of the other players in the forward line, I think Caden Jackson needs to keep his eyes open, because I think there could be a potential opportunity for him to move on during January. Obviously, a great worker, but not necessarily an incredible footballer, and I think that's what Derby County need to be looking to improve on if they're hoping to be able to solidify this season and potentially push on for the playoffs in the second half of the campaign. But obviously, we're going to have to wait and see how these next 6 weeks do go. Now, you can obviously let me know your thoughts on this down in the comments if you have not done so already. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and turn on that notification bell. This is the Derby County Digest, the home of your Derby County content.